Well, first of all, Michelle and all of you who are associated with ODK, thank you very much for bestowing on me this honor. What a ceremony. I don't know about the rest of you. It felt a little bit like I was in church twice today. I'll try to be brief because I think I'm the only thing standing between you and that awesome football team, the Detroit Lions. I'm sure many of you want to get home and watch them. But what I thought I would do is share with you a few of my observations of leadership. I've been very fortunate in my career to have worked with some wonderful leaders. And so what I'm about to tell you comes from my observation of leaders and also from my study of leaders. At the Hauenstein Center, we have a number of people come in and talk about leadership. So I thought this would be interesting to you. The first thing you notice about good leaders, even great leaders, is that they connect with people. That is such an important quality that they have. This was illustrated to me so powerfully not too long ago when we had a man named Russ Mawby who came to the Leadership Academy at the Hauenstein Center. Now, Russ Mawby had an amazing career. He, for 25 years, led the Kellogg Foundation. He took the Kellogg Foundation from being sort of a middling foundation to a foundation that was the 5th greatest philanthropy in the world. So this is a man who had leadership skills. About a week and a half out of our having Russ, he wrote me a little email and he said, "Gleaves, I want to know better who my audience are going to be. Could you tell me something about the students, the leadership fellows who will be there?" We have some 30 leadership fellows. So what I did was I wrote him back and I said, well, here are the majors, here's where they stand, their class standing, here's some of their interests and that kind of thing. He thanked me. And darned if Russ didn't come to the Leadership Academy event where we had invited him to speak early. And as leadership fellows came in, he was very eager to engage with them. So he'd walk up to them, shake their hand, find out about them. Russ illustrates a principle that I think is very interesting in life. There are two kinds of people, basically. They're the kinds of people who come into a room and they say, "Here I am. I'm probably the most important person in the room." The second kind of person there is in this world is the person who walks into a room and they say, "There you are. There you are. There you are. And I can't wait to get to know you." Russ Mawby was that kind of individual. He came into that room and he worked the room in the best sense of the word. There was nothing he was going to get out of that audience. There were no donations that were going to come to the Kellogg Foundation. He was a people person. He connected with people. He also knew that principle that people don't care what you know until they know you care. Well, that was Russ Mawby, an outstanding example of a leader connecting with people. A second thing you notice about leaders is that they're passionate. Leaders are extremely passionate people. They are driven to improve something. They're driven to join something in which they can make a difference in life. They see some issue that is a problem in our society, or in their little group, their little platoon, as Edmund Burke would say. Or they see some opportunity that's never been taken advantage of before, and they want to make a difference for the rest of us. A person that I think of, this comes from my work experiences. I worked for John Engler for 11.5 years. Now, I don't mention Engler in any partisan sense here. Whether you agreed or disagreed with his politics is really beside the point of what I'm trying to say here. What I want to emphasize about Engler was his leadership capacity and especially this passion of his. Let me tell you what he was like as a kid. When John Engler was a boy, by the time he was 12, 13, 14 years old, he was always fighting with his dad for 2 sections of the newspaper every morning there in Beale City. He was always fighting over the sports section. He wanted the sports section first, but he also wanted the politics section. Now, how do you explain that in a 12, 13, 14-year-old kid? He was passionate to learn about this state from the earliest age. It's just something that was in him. His dad would talk to him at the table about politics. They had a lot of interesting conversations. Engler would argue with his dad. It just was a very interesting household in which that table talk was very formative. So he goes to Michigan State University, and every class he takes, he thinks, what can I learn from this class to become a leader. Specifically, what can I learn in this class if I want to be a state rep? And by the time he was a senior, he took a class and he wrote a paper that is now famous, in which he outlined in some detail with his political science professor exactly what he would do to win an election as a 21-year-old, taking on a very established and popular incumbent in his own party. That word maverick, you know, that got so popular. Engler back in 1970-71 would have been considered a maverick. And he followed the plan of that paper. He planned the work and he worked the plan. And he ran in the primary. He out-hustled, because of his passion, his desire to lead, he out-hustled the very smug opponent, fellow Republican. He out-hustled him, and you know the rest of the story. He spent the next 20 years in the Michigan legislature and then 12 years as Michigan governor. And it started with a college paper, and before that it started just with this desire to know what was going on in the world around him and to make a difference. A third quality that leaders have is that they have the ability to combine a great imaginative capacity, imagination, with practical intelligence. Let me give you another Michigan example of this. This would be Henry Ford. Henry Ford was an extraordinary person. Now, you're hearing a lot about Henry Ford these days because our auto industry has been taking such hits. But you have to go back 105, 110 years ago when Michigan was on the cusp of a very exciting adventure in our economy. Henry Ford was the kind of guy who had this imagination to see what was possible. The idea of the horseless carriage intrigued him. And while he was an engineer at Detroit Edison, and while his work was interesting to him, do you know what this guy did in his spare time? Talk about passion. In his spare time, he built automobile engines and then went on to build cars. And he thought, this is the guy, this is the craftsman, the tinkerer, who's right in the garage doing this kind of thing. Now, it's a really remarkable thing. He actually is able to market this car that he builds in his garage, sell it. If you go to Greenfield Village, you can see it to this day. But you know what? He didn't stop there. He realized that if he took the idea of the assembly line had been developed in the meatpacking industry in Chicago. They take 20 workers, and Swift and Armour were the avant-garde of this process, and from the execution of the animal all the way to the packaging, there'd be 20 people as these animals would move by. Henry Ford took that idea and he said, instead of just building a car from scratch in the garage, what if I take it and I put it on an assembly line and have people who are actually able to stand in place and assemble this thing. And then the second thing he thought, because all of a sudden this was generating lots and lots of money, he said, what if I make it possible for the workers to be able to afford what they're building? So he instituted, as you know, in 1914, it's a well-known Michigan story, the $5 a day work day for these workers, so that they could become part of what's been called the blue-collar aristocracy that had its home right here in this state. So he made the price of these cars go down, and he made it possible for the workers, ordinary working men in those days. Women were not on the assembly lines in those days. Ordinary working men to buy the product that they made. But you know what? He didn't stop there.